Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. 8 years ago, the crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Langley mansion as 28-year-old Ethan stared blankly at the ornate mirror in his bedroom. His blue eyes, once sharp with intelligence, now held the glazed look of a man walking through life in a medicated haze. The pills his mother gave him every morning had become as routine as breathing, little white tablets that she called his vitamins, but which kept his mind wrapped in chemical fog. Timeline. 8 years ago, Ethan is 28, about to marry 19-year-old Maya. "Ethan, darling, time for your medicine," came the silky voice from his doorway. Victoria glided into the room like a predator in designer heels, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching a silver tray with his daily dose of control. At 52, she was still strikingly beautiful, but there was something cold and reptilian behind her smile. Something that would have terrified anyone not already under her spell. "I don't feel well today, Mother," Ethan mumbled, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the glass of water. "My head feels foggy." Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous before her expression smoothed back into maternal concern. "Oh, sweetheart, that's exactly why you need your vitamins. You've been under so much stress with the business." She pressed the pills into his palm, her fingers lingering possessively on his skin. "You know what happens when you don't take them, don't you? Remember when you were 16 and tried to rebel?" Ethan's face went pale. Even through the chemical fog, the memory of those 6 months in the psychiatric ward remained vivid. The padded walls, the restraints, the endless injections, while his mother visited weekly to whisper about how disappointed she was in his breakdown. She had told everyone he'd had a mental collapse, but Ethan sometimes wondered in his clearer moments if he'd simply tried to escape her suffocating control. "That's my good boy," Victoria purred as he swallowed the pills without further protest. "Now we have important business to discuss. Your bride will be arriving this afternoon." Ethan blinked slowly, struggling to process her words. "Bride? Yes, darling. I've arranged everything perfectly." Victoria's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Her name is Maya Cole, a beautiful little chocolate girl whose family owes some very dangerous people a great deal of money, $2 million to be exact." She began pacing around him, like a shark circling wounded prey. Her stepmother was quite eager to settle the debt by offering her stepdaughter's services. "I don't understand," Ethan said, though part of him, the buried part that still remembered who he used to be, felt sick at his mother's casual cruelty. Victoria stopped directly in front of him, placing her hands on his shoulders with deceptive gentleness. "She's just a breeding mare, darling. Use her. Get an heir to secure your grandfather's inheritance, then dispose of her. Just like I taught you with your pets when you were little." Ethan flinched at the memory. When he was 8, Victoria had given him a puppy for Christmas, let him love it for months, then forced him to watch as she drowned it in the bathtub. "Love makes you weak, Ethan," she had told him as he sobbed. "The strong take what they want and discard what they don't need. But, Mother, marriage is supposed to be what? Love?" Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Love is for the weak, Ethan. I've spent 28 years making sure you're strong. Don't disappoint me now." 3 hours later, Ethan stood in the mansion's grand foyer, swaying slightly from his increased medication dosage as a rusted sedan pulled up the circular driveway. He watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as a heavy-set woman with bleached hair and dead eyes dragged a young black woman from the passenger seat. Maya was 19 and heartbreakingly beautiful, with smooth dark skin and large, frightened eyes that seemed to see too much. Her simple cotton dress was clean but cheap, and she clutched a small suitcase like a lifeline. Even through his medicated haze, Ethan felt something stir in his chest, something his mother had tried to kill but never quite succeeded in destroying. Denise, Maya's stepmother, practically shoved the girl up the marble steps. "Here she is, just like we agreed," she said to Victoria, her voice rough from years of chain-smoking and harder drugs, pure as driven snow, though not for much longer. "Eh? Excellent," Victoria replied, her gaze appraising Maya like livestock. "Ethan, come meet your wife." Maya's eyes found Ethan's, and for a moment, something passed between thema recognition of shared suffering, perhaps, or simply two drowning people seeing each other in the depths. She was so young, so vulnerable, and despite the chemicals clouding his mind, Ethan felt an unfamiliar urge to protect her. "Hello," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm Maya. Ethan," he managed, his tongue feeling thick in his mouth. I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Ethan, darling, you're being ridiculous. Miss Cole, you'll be staying in the servants' quarters until the wedding tomorrow. I trust you understand your position here." Maya's chin lifted slightly, a tiny act of defiance that Ethan admired despite himself. "I understand that my stepmother sold me to pay her debts. I understand that I have no choice. But I won't pretend to be grateful." Denise backhanded Maya across the face, so hard the girl stumbled. "Mind your tongue, girl. These people own you now." "That's quite enough," Victoria said smoothly, though her eyes glittered with amusement. "Violence should be saved for private moments. Ethan, escort your bride to her room. The wedding is at 10 tomorrow morning." The wedding was a mockery of everything sacred. Held in the mansion's private chapel with only a bought and paid-for judge and a handful of Victoria's society friends as witnesses, it lasted less than 15 minutes. Maya wore a simple white dress that Victoria had chosen, modest and cheap, designed to emphasize her status as a purchased commodity rather than a beloved bride. Ethan, heavily medicated and barely coherent, spoke his vows in a monotone, while Victoria watched from the front pew like a spider admiring her web. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was gentle, the only kindness Maya had received since arriving at the mansion. The reception was held in the mansion's ballroom, though reception was too generous a term for what amounted to Victoria's friends drinking expensive champagne while making snide comments about the charity case Ethan had married. Maya sat alone at the head table, ignored by everyone except the occasional cruel stare or whispered slur. She was picking at her untouched dinner when a large hand settled on her shoulder. Maya looked up to see a man in his 50s with Ethan's eyes, but none of his medicated gentleness. This was Nathan Langley, Victoria's brother, and the way he looked at her made her skin crawl. "Little sister-in-law," Nathan said, his breath reeking of whiskey and something darker, "you look lonely. Why don't we go somewhere quiet and get better acquainted?" "I'm fine here. Thank you," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Nathan's grip tightened on her shoulder, his fingers digging into her skin. "I wasn't asking, sweetheart. Victoria and I have an understanding about family hospitality." Before Maya could protest, Nathan was pulling her from her chair. She looked desperately toward Ethan, but he was slumped in his seat, unconscious from whatever Victoria had slipped into his drink. No one else seemed to notice or care as Nathan dragged her from the ballroom and down a dark corridor toward the mansion's guest wing. "Please," Maya whispered as he pushed her into a bedroom and locked the door behind them. "Please don't do this." Nathan's smile was a mirror of his sister's, beautiful and absolutely without mercy. "Welcome to the family, little girl. Let me show you how we treat our new toys." What happened next would haunt Maya for the rest of her life. Nathan's assault was brutal and deliberate, designed not just to violate her body, but to break her spirit. When it was over, he left her bleeding and sobbing on the guest room floor with a final whispered threat. "Tell anyone about this, and I'll make sure both you and that drugged-up husband of yours disappear." Victoria owns the police, the judges, and everyone else who matters in this city. Hours later, Maya finally found the strength to return to the bedroom she was supposed to share with Ethan. He was still unconscious, sprawled across the bed in his wedding suit, completely unaware of what had happened to his new wife. Maya stood in the doorway, watching the man she'd been sold to like cattle, and felt something die inside her chest. She was trapped in a house of monsters, married to a man too broken to protect her, carrying the child of either her husband or his uncle, and there was no escape. As she finally crawled into bed beside Ethan's unconscious form, Maya placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach and made a promise that would sustain her through the hell to come. Whatever it cost her, whatever she had to endure, she would protect the innocent life growing inside her. Even if it killed her, she would not let these monsters destroy her child the way they had destroyed everything else they touched. This baby would be her salvation, her reason to survive, her hope for a future beyond the darkness that had swallowed her whole. Outside their bedroom window, storm clouds gathered over the Langley mansion, and somewhere in the depths of the house, Victoria smiled in her sleep, already planning the systematic destruction of the young woman who dared to enter her son's life. The web was complete. Now the real horror could begin. Chapter 2. The Poisoned Son and Broken Wife. 7 years and 9 months ago, 3 months after the wedding. The morning after her wedding night, Maya woke to find Ethan's side of the bed empty and cold. The brutal events of the previous evening crashed over her like a devastating tsunami. Nathan's assault, the threats. The shattering realization that she was completely alone in a house full of predators. Her body ached in places she didn't want to acknowledge, and the metallic taste of terror coated her tongue. A soft knock on the door made her heart race. "Come in," she whispered, pulling the sheets up to her chin. Ethan entered, carrying a breakfast tray, his movements still sluggish from whatever Victoria had drugged him with the night before. His blue eyes were clearer than they'd been yesterday, but still held that medicated haze that seemed to follow him everywhere. "I brought you something to eat," he said quietly, setting the tray on the bedside table. Don't remember much about last night. Did I hurt you?" The genuine concern in his voice nearly broke Maya's resolve to stay strong. No, she lied. Because the truth would either destroy him or get them both killed. "You didn't hurt me." Ethan's shoulders sagged with relief. "Good. I sometimes, when I take my medicine, I lose time." I was afraid he trailed off, studying her face with sudden intensity. "You've been crying." Before Maya could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Ethan, where are you, darling? Time for your vitamins." The change in Ethan was immediate and heartbreaking. His face went blank, his posture straightened into something mechanical, and the brief spark of humanity Maya had glimpsed vanished behind a wall of pharmaceutical fog. "I have to go," he said in a monotone voice, already moving toward the door. "Mother needs me." Downstairs in Victoria's private study, the morning ritual began. Ethan sat in a leather chair like an obedient child, while his mother prepared his daily dose of control. Today, however, she had increased the dosage, 2 additional pills that would ensure he remained compliant during the delicate early stages of her plan. "Open wide, my precious boy," Victoria cooed, placing the pills on his tongue before holding a crystal glass of water to his lips. "Drink it all down. That's my good son." As Ethan swallowed, Victoria's fingers traced his jawline with disturbing intimacy. "You know, darling, I've been thinking about your new wife. She seems resistant, defiant. She's just scared," Ethan mumbled, already feeling the increased medication taking effect. "It's a lot to adjust to." Victoria's smile was sharp as a scalpel. "Oh, my sweet boy, you're so naive. Women like her are manipulative by nature. She's probably already plotting to turn you against me, to make you choose between your wife and your mother." Her voice dropped to a hypnotic whisper. "But you know what happens to people who try to come between us, don't you?" Ethan's eyes glazed over further as the drugs hit his system. "Yes, mother. Tell me what happens, darling." They disappear." Ethan recited like a trained parrot, like the puppy, like the gardener who smiled at you too much, like father. "Exactly." Victoria pressed a kiss to his forehead, her lipstick leaving a red mark like a brand of ownership. "Maya is trying to poison you against me. Look how she flinches when you touch her. She's probably already cheating, spreading her legs for the first man who shows her attention." The medication made Ethan's thoughts sluggish, but somewhere deep inside, a voice screamed that this was wrong. That voice was quickly drowned out by the chemical tide, washing through his brain. "I want you to watch her carefully," Victoria continued, her hands resting possessively on his shoulders. "And when she inevitably betrays you, because she will, darling, they always do, you'll know exactly what needs to be done." Flashback. Ethan at age 8. The memory surfaced unbidden as Ethan sat in his mother's study, triggered by the familiar smell of her perfume and the weight of her hands on his shoulders. He was 8 years old again, standing in the bathroom of their old house, watching in horror as Victoria held his beloved puppy, Buddy, under the bathwater. "Please, Mama, please don't," little Ethan had sobbed, reaching desperately for his pet. "I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. This is what happens when you love something more than you love me," Victoria had said calmly, her perfectly manicured hands never wavering as Buddy's struggles grew weaker. "Love is weakness, Ethan. Love is betrayal. I'm teaching you to be strong." When Buddy finally went still, Victoria had lifted Ethan's chin with her wet hand. "Do you understand now, baby? Everything you love will eventually hurt you. Everything except Mama. Mama is the only one who will never leave you, never betray you, never stop loving you. But only if you're a good boy. Only if you choose me first, always." 8-year-old Ethan had nodded through his tears, not understanding that his mother was systematically destroying his capacity for love, molding him into the weapon she needed him to become. Present day. Ethan, darling, are you listening to me?" Victoria's voice snapped him back to the present, where he sat like a drugged statue in her study. "Yes, Mother, I'm listening." "Good. Now, I have a special job for your wife. She needs to understand her place in this household. Victoria's smile was predatory. I think some honest work will be good for her character. An hour later, Maya found herself kneeling on the marble floor of the mansion's grand foyer, scrubbing with a brush that seemed designed more for torture than cleaning. At 3 months pregnant, the position was agony. But the alternative Victoria's promised consequences was worse. You missed a spot, came Victoria's crisp voice from above. Maya looked up to see the older woman standing over her, elegant in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Right there. By your dirty little hands. Maya bit back her response and continued scrubbing. The ammonia-based cleaner made her morning sickness worse, but she forced herself to keep working. For the baby. Everything was for the baby now. I know what you're thinking, Victoria said conversationally, circling Maya like a shark. You think this is temporary. You think once you pop out that little bastard you're carrying, Ethan will suddenly grow a spine and stand up to me. She laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Oh, my dear, you have no idea how thoroughly I've broken my son. He's not broken, Maya whispered before she could stop herself. The words had barely left her lips when Victoria's designer heel connected with her ribs, sending her sprawling across the wet floor. Excuse me, did you just contradict me in my own house? Maya struggled to get back to her hands and knees, her side throbbing where Victoria had kicked her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... You didn't mean to what? Speak out of turn? Question my authority? Victoria grabbed a handful of Maya's hair, yanking her head back. Let me tell you about Ethan, you stupid girl. I've been feeding him psychiatric medication since he was 15 years old, cocktails of antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and sedatives that have turned his brain into putty. He doesn't remember half the things he does. And what he does remember is filtered through a haze of chemicals that make him completely dependent on me. Maya's eyes widened in horror. You're poisoning your own son. I'm protecting him, Victoria snarled. From weakness, from distraction, from little sluts like you, who think they can waltz in here and steal him away from me. She released Maya's hair, sending her sprawling again. Ethan is mine. He's always been mine, and when your bastard child is born, I'll make sure it understands its place, too. The months that followed were a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Victoria increased Ethan's medication whenever he showed signs of independent thought, especially if he expressed concern for Maya's welfare. She forced Maya to work increasingly demanding physical labor as her pregnancy progressed. Scrubbing floors, carrying heavy laundry baskets, cleaning windows while balanced on ladders. Ethan, lost in his pharmaceutical fog, barely seemed to notice his wife's deteriorating condition. When he did express concern, Victoria was quick to redirect his attention. She's being dramatic, darling, she would purr, stroking his hair as he sat in her study like a trained pet. Pregnancy makes women manipulative. She's trying to make you feel guilty so you'll choose her over me. You're not going to fall for such an obvious trick, are you? By her 8th month, Maya was exhausted, malnourished, and desperate. She tried calling her stepmother, Denise, for help, only to be told that her debt was transferred to the Langleys. She attempted to contact social services, but Victoria's connections ran deep, and somehow her calls were never returned. The night Maya went into labor, she was alone in the basement laundry room, folding Ethan's shirts while contractions rippled through her swollen belly. She made it halfway up the stairs before the pain doubled her over, her water breaking on the marble steps. Help, she called out, her voice echoing through the empty mansion. Please, someone help me. But the only person who heard was Victoria, who appeared at the top of the stairs like an avenging angel in a silk nightgown. Oh dear, she said with mock concern. Is it time already? The baby's coming? Maya gasped, clutching the banister. I need to get to the hospital. Hospital? Victoria laughed. Oh, my sweet child, I don't think so. You see, if you're carrying my son's heir, then you'll survive this just fine. And if you're carrying some other man's bastard, she shrugged elegantly. Well, nature has a way of sorting these things out. With that, Victoria turned and walked away, leaving Maya to collapse on the cold basement floor as her labor intensified. For the next 12 hours, she endured the most difficult experience of her life, completely alone, with only the concrete beneath her and her own determination to keep her going. When Zoe finally emerged, small, perfect, and screaming with the fury of someone who had fought hard to enter this world, Maya cradled her daughter against her chest and wept. The baby had Ethan's eyes and Maya's stubborn chin, and in that moment, Maya knew with absolute certainty that this child was worth every moment of suffering she had endured. Hello, my Zoe, she whispered. her tears falling onto the baby's tiny face. "Mama's here. Mama will always be here." Upstairs, Victoria smiled as she listened to the sounds of new life echoing from the basement. Soon she would know whether the child was worth keeping or whether it would need to be disposed of. But for now, she had more pressing matters to attend to, like making sure Ethan never remembered where he'd been when his supposed child was being born. Chapter 3. The Ultimate Destruction. 7 years ago, 3 weeks after Zoe's birth, Maya was finally strong enough to climb the basement stairs. Her body still ached from giving birth alone on the concrete floor. But her daughter needed proper care, warmth, and medical attention. She wrapped Zoe in the thin blanket Victoria had mockingly provided, a rough wool thing that scratched the baby's delicate skin, and made her way to the main floor of the mansion. She found Ethan in the library, staring blankly at financial reports, while his untouched breakfast grew cold beside him. The sight of him sitting there, clean and comfortable, while she had nearly died giving birth to his child, sparked a flame of anger in Maya's chest. "Ethan," she said softly, not wanting to startle him, "I'd like you to meet your daughter." He looked up slowly, his blue eyes struggling to focus through the pharmaceutical haze. When his gaze landed on the tiny bundle in Maya's arms, something flickered across his face of surprise, wonder, perhaps even love. For a moment, the medication seemed to clear, and Maya saw a glimpse of the man he might have been without his mother's poison. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch Zoe's tiny hand. "She has your nose," Maya said, hope blooming in her chest for the first time in months. "And your eyes, Ethan. She needs proper care. A crib, baby formula, medical checkups." "Of course," Ethan said, his voice stronger than she'd heard it in weeks. "Whatever she needs, whatever you both need." He stood up, swaying slightly but determined. "I'll call Dr. Flood, Bennett, and we'll need to set up a nursery." "Ethan, darling, what's all this commotion?" Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a blade through silk. She glided into the library, wearing an immaculate cream-colored dress, her perfectly styled hair not showing a single strand out of place, her eyes immediately fixed on the baby in Maya's arms, and her expression shifted from curiosity to something far more dangerous. "Mother, meet your granddaughter," Ethan said, his voice already beginning to slur as the morning's medication kicked in. "Isn't she perfect?" Victoria hummed, circling them like a predator studying potential prey. "She's certainly small. Premature, perhaps?" "She's not premature," Maya said firmly. "She's exactly where she should be developmentally." Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "Of course, dear. I'm sure you would know." She turned to Ethan, her hand settling possessively on his arm. "Darling, we need to discuss some important matters business that requires your full attention, but Zoe can wait." Victoria finished smoothly. "Maya, take the child back to your room. Ethan and I have work to do." In Victoria's private study, the real work began. Ethan sat in his usual chair while his mother prepared not just his regular medication, but an additional cocktail of drugs that would make him more suggestible, more paranoid, and completely unable to form coherent memories. "Drink this, darling," she said, handing him a glass of what looked like orange juice but tasted metallic and bitter. "It's a special vitamin blend. You've been under so much stress lately." As Ethan drank, Victoria opened a manila folder and spread several documents across her desk. DNA test results printed on official letterhead from the city's most prestigious medical laboratory, results that had cost her $50,000 to fabricate, but which would be worth every penny. "I have some disturbing news, my love," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I had that child tested, just to be safe. The results are well. See for yourself." Ethan's drugged mind struggled to process the papers she placed in front of him. The words swam on the page, but the conclusion was clear enough. Probability of paternity 0. Baifanjaling. "I don't understand," he mumbled, his speech becoming increasingly slurred. "How is this possible?" "Oh, my poor boy," Victoria crooned, moving behind his chair to massage his shoulders with disturbing intimacy. "That little whore has been playing you for a fool from the very beginning. The child isn't yours. She's been spreading her legs for God knows who while you've been working to provide for her. But she was here in the house. When could she? Men come and go from this estate all the time. Darling, gardeners, delivery boys, repair workers. 19, one of them could be the father of that bastard child." Victoria's fingers tightened on his shoulders. "I tried to warn you, didn't I? I told you she was manipulative, that she was using you, but you wouldn't listen to your mother." The drugs were making Ethan's thoughts muddy and paranoid. Fragments of memories, or were they dreams? Flickered through his mind. Maya flinching when he touched her, her tears on their wedding night. Her defiance when Victoria tried to discipline her. She never loved me, he said, his voice hollow. She was just using me. That's right, baby, Victoria whispered, her breath hot against his ear. But Mama is here. Mama will always protect you from women like her. All you have to do is trust me. Like you always have. The confrontation came that evening during the worst snowstorm in decades. Ethan, heavily drugged and filled with his mother's poison, burst into the bedroom where Maya was feeding Zoe with a bottle of formula she'd managed to scrounge from the kitchen. "You, lying whore!" he screamed, the vicious words foreign in his mouth but spilling out anyway, programmed by hours of Victoria's psychological manipulation. "You made a fool of me." Maya looked up in shock, Zoe still in her arms. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" "The baby." He threw the DNA results at her feet, the papers scattering like broken promises. "She's not mine. You've been cheating on me, haven't you? Spreading your legs for every man who looks at you." "That's not true." Maya's eyes filled with tears as she clutched Zoe protectively. "Ethan, I've never been with anyone but you." She stopped herself before mentioning Nathan's assault, knowing it would only make things worse. "Liar." Ethan's hand shot out, striking her across the face hard enough to make her ears ring. The blow sent her stumbling backward, and she nearly dropped Zoe before catching herself. "Please," she whispered, her cheek burning where he'd hit her. "Please just listen to me. I can explain everything." But Ethan was beyond listening. The drugs had made him paranoid and violent, exactly as Victoria had intended. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out of my house. Take your bastard and get out." "Ethan, it's snowing. It's below freezing outside. Zoe is just 3 weeks old." I said, "Get out." He grabbed Maya by the arm, dragging her toward the door with surprising strength. Zoe began crying, her tiny wails piercing the night air as Maya struggled to protect her from Ethan's drug-fueled rage. "Please, Ethan, please, just let us stay until morning. I'll leave. I promise I'll leave. But please don't put us out in this storm. You should have thought of that before you made a fool of yourself," he said, the words clearly so fierce even as they came from his mouth. He threw open the front door, and an Arctic wind howled into the foyer, bringing with it a swirl of snow and ice. "Take nothing," he commanded, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Nothing in this house belongs to you. You came here with nothing, and you'll leave with nothing." Maya found herself standing in the driveway in nothing but a thin nightgown and slippers, holding her 3-week-old daughter against her chest as the blizzard raged around them. The cold bit through her clothing immediately, and Zoe's cries became weaker as the freezing air assaulted her tiny lungs. Behind them, the mansion's doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the storm. Maya could see lights in the windows, could imagine the warmth inside, but she knew that world was lost to her forever. Her car, an old sedan that barely ran in good weather, was parked at the end of the long driveway. By the time she reached it, her feet were numb with cold, and Zoe had gone ominously quiet in her arms. With frozen fingers, she managed to get the door open and collapse into the driver's seat, immediately wrapping Zoe in her own thin nightgown to try to share what little body heat she had left. The car wouldn't start. Again and again, she turned the key, but the engine wouldn't catch in the freezing temperatures. Zoe's lips were turning blue, and Maya realized with growing horror that they were both going to die in this car, in this storm, because of Ethan's drug-addled rage and Victoria's calculating evil. But then, by some miracle, the engine caught. The heater barely worked, but it was enough to keep them from freezing as Maya navigated the empty, snow-covered streets toward the only place she had left to go. A homeless shelter on the other side of town. Back in the mansion, Victoria found Ethan in his study, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. The drugs were wearing off enough for him to feel confused about what had just happened, but not enough for him to remember clearly. Did I just do something?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "You did what needed to be done, darling." Victoria purred, settling into the chair across from him with a glass of champagne. "You protected yourself from a woman who was using you. I'm so proud of you for being strong." "I feel like I hurt someone," Ethan mumbled, rubbing his temples. "But I can't remember. Just the headache from your medication. Sweetheart, here, let me give you something to help you sleep." She handed him another pill, this one designed to wipe the evening's events from his memory entirely. By morning, he would remember nothing except that Maya had left with another man's child, abandoning him just as Victoria had always predicted she would. "That's my good boy," Victoria whispered as Ethan's eyes fluttered closed. "Mama's here. Mama will always be here." As her son slept fitfully in his chair, Victoria poured herself another glass of champagne and raised it in a toast to the empty room. "To family loyalty," she said with a satisfied smile, "and to removing obstacles that stand in the way of love." Outside, the storm raged on, burying all traces of Maya and Zoe's flight into the frozen night, but Victoria wasn't worried about them surviving. After all, she had what she wanted most. Her son. Alone and dependent. Exactly where he belonged. The next morning, she would tell the staff that Ethan's wife had run away with her lover, taking the illegitimate child with her. Everyone would sympathize with poor Ethan, betrayed by the woman he tried to help. And if Maya and the baby died in the storm, well, that would just be one less complication to deal with. Victoria hummed softly to herself as she finished her champagne, already planning the lies she would tell and the evidence she would plant to make Ethan's abandonment story absolutely convincing. After all, she had a reputation to protect and an empire to secure, and now, with no distractions, Ethan would be completely hers once again, just the way it should be, just the way it had always been meant to be, mother and son forever. Chapter 4. The Heart-Shattering Discovery. Present day, 7 years later, Ethan sat in the back of his black Mercedes, staring vacantly out the tinted windows as his driver navigated through the city's poorest district. At 35, he had become everything his mother had molded him to be. A cold, efficient businessman who felt nothing, remembered little, and questioned even less. The pharmaceutical cocktail that Victoria still administered every morning had done its work too well, turning him into a hollow shell of the man he might have been. "Sir, we're approaching the Carter property," his driver announced, pulling up to a rundown apartment complex that Ethan's company was planning to demolish for a new shopping center. Ethan nodded absently, his movements mechanical. "Wait here. This shouldn't take long." The meeting with the property manager was supposed to be routine, a final walkthrough before the demolition crews arrived next week. But as Ethan stood in the crumbling courtyard, surrounded by peeling paint and broken dreams, something stirred in the depths of his medicated Minda, feeling he couldn't name, a recognition he couldn't place. He had been here before, not physically, but emotionally. This desperation, this hopelessness, it reminded him of something buried so deep beneath layers of psychiatric drugs that it barely registered as memory. "The residents have all been relocated," the property manager was saying, but Ethan had stopped listening. Across the courtyard, a flash of movement caught his eye, a small figure darting between the buildings, trying to stay hidden. "I need to walk the perimeter alone," Ethan heard himself say. "Give me 20 minutes. The property manager looked confused, but didn't argue with the man who was paying his salary. "Of course, sir. I'll be in the office if you need anything." Ethan found himself walking toward the movement he'd seen, his expensive Italian shoes crunching on broken glass and discarded dreams. The Xanax and mood stabilizers that usually kept his emotions in check seemed to be wearing off ahead of schedule, leaving him feeling strangely alert and unsettled. He rounded the corner of the building and stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting on the concrete steps of a basement apartment, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was small for her age, with delicate features and skin the color of warm honey. Her clothes were clean but obviously second-hand, and her tiny hands were raw and bloody from scrubbing. The child was hunched over a bucket of soapy water, tears streaming down her face as she tried to clean what looked like her own blood from the concrete steps. The scrub brush in her hands was almost as big as her torso, and every movement clearly caused her pain. Ethan felt something crack in his chest, not the clean break of a bone, but the slow, devastating fracture of ice beginning to thaw under overwhelming warmth. "Hey," he called out softly, not wanting to frighten her. "Are you okay?" The little girl looked up, and Ethan's world tilted on its axis. She had his eyes, the same unusual shade of blue that he saw in the mirror every morning, the same long lashes that his mother had always called his prettiest feature. But it was more than just the eyes, the shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, even the way she held her head. She was like looking at a photograph of himself as a child. If that photograph had been painted in shades of bronze and gold instead of pale ivory. "I'm okay, mister," she said in a voice that was far too mature for her age. "I just got to get this clean before Grandma Denise gets home, or she'll be real mad." Ethan's legs felt unsteady as he approached her. "What happened to your hands, sweetheart?" The little girl, his daughter, some buried part of his mind whispered, looked down at her bleeding palms with resignation that no child should ever possess. "The brush is rough, but Grandma says I got to use it, or the steps won't get clean." She says, "Lazy girls don't deserve dinner." "How old are you?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. 7, she said, wiping her nose with the back of her wrist. "Well, 7 and 3 months and 2 days. Mama says I'm real good at math. 7 years. 7 years since he'd thrown a young mother and her newborn baby out into a blizzard. 7 years since Victoria had convinced him that the child wasn't his, that Maya had betrayed him with another man. 7 years of living with the ghost of what he'd done, buried beneath layers of medication and lies. "Where is your mama?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's at work. She works real hard 3 jobs, so we can have food and pay Grandma Denise for letting us live here." The little girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mama cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. I think it's 'cause she's tired." Ethan knelt down beside her, and up close, he could see even more of himself in her features, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was thinking, the small scar on her chin that matched one he'd gotten at the same age, the intelligent light in her eyes that no amount of hardship had been able to dim. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Zoe," she said, and Ethan felt what was left of his heart shatter completely. "Mama says she named me that 'cause I was her miracle when everything was dark." "Zoe," he repeated, tasting the name like a prayer. "That's a beautiful name." She smiled then, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of his life. "Thank you, mister. You're real nice. Most people don't talk to me." "Why are you crying, Zoe?" Ethan asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Zoe's smile faded, and fresh tears began to flow down her cheeks. "I was thinking about my daddy," she whispered. "Mama says he had to go away before I was born, but sometimes I pretend he might come back someday." Ethan's chest felt like it was caving in. "What do you think about your daddy?" "Mama says he was handsome and sad and that he loved us but got confused by mean people." Zoe wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I think maybe if I'm real good and help Mama enough, he might come find us. But Grandma Denise says he don't want us 'cause we're not good enough." The words hit Ethan like physical blows. This innocent child, his daughter, had spent 7 years believing that her father had abandoned her because she wasn't good enough. While he'd been living in luxury, numbed by drugs and surrounded by lies, his baby girl had been scrubbing floors with bleeding hands and dreaming of a father who might love her someday. "Zoe," Ethan said, his voice breaking, "what if I told you that your daddy didn't want to leave? What if he was sick and mean people lied to him and made him do something terrible?" Zoe tilted her head, studying his face with those eyes that were so achingly familiar. "Are you talking about my daddy, mister?" Ethan couldn't speak. He couldn't tell her the truth, not here, not like this, not when he didn't even know if he was strong enough to break free from his mother's control. But he couldn't lie to her either. Not when she was looking at him with such hope and trust. "I think," he said carefully, "that any man who had a little girl like you would be the luckiest daddy in the world." Zoe smiled again, that heartbreaking sunrise smile. "Mama says that, too. She says maybe someday he'll remember how much he loves us." "I'm sure he already remembers," Ethan whispered, tears he hadn't shed in years beginning to fall down his face. "I'm sure he never really forgot." They sat in silence for a moment, this broken man and the daughter he'd thrown away, both of them crying for different reasons but sharing the same pain. Zoe reached out with one small, bloody hand and patted Ethan's knee. "Don't be sad, mister," she said with the wisdom of a child who had comforted her mother through 7 years of heartbreak. "Mama says that love always finds a way, even when everything seems impossible." Ethan looked at this tiny miracle, this perfect little person who had somehow survived poverty and neglect and still had enough kindness left to comfort a stranger. She was everything good that he had destroyed, everything pure that his mother had tried to corrupt, everything hopeful that his family had tried to crush. "Zoe," he said, his voice stronger now as something awakened in him that 7 years of drugs hadn't been able to kill. "What if I told you that someone was going to make sure you and your mama never had to worry about being safe or having enough to eat ever again?" "I'd say that sounds like a fairy tale," Zoe replied with a sad little laugh. "But Mama reads me fairy tales sometimes. And she says even if they're not real, they're still important because they help us remember what to hope for." Ethan stood up, his mind clearer than it had been in years. The pharmaceutical fog that usually clouded his thoughts was lifting, burned away by the intensity of what he was feeling. "Zoe, I need you to do something very important for me," he said. "I need you to go inside and tell your mama that someone is coming to help someone who's going to make sure you never have to scrub floors with bleeding hands again." "Really?" Zoe's eyes lit up with cautious hope. "You promise?" "I promise," Ethan said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "And Zoe, I need you to remember something very important. You are good enough. You have always been good enough. Any daddy would be proud to have a brave, smart, beautiful little girl like you." Zoe threw her arms around Ethan's legs in a spontaneous hug that nearly brought him to his knees. "You're the nicest man I ever met, mister. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, too." As Ethan held his daughter really held her for the first time in her life, he knew exactly what he was looking for. He was looking for the strength to break free from his mother's poison, the courage to face what he'd done, the wisdom to protect this innocent child from any more harm, and the power to destroy anyone who had hurt his family. "I love you, Zoe," he whispered into her hair, words he should have said 7 years ago, more than you'll ever know. He didn't know if she understood the significance of his words, but she hugged him tighter. "I love you too, nice mister. Will you come back and see me?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Ethan promised, and for the first time in 7 years, he meant every word he said. As he walked back to his car, Ethan was no longer the hollow shell his mother had created. The man who had thrown his wife and baby into a blizzard was gone, replaced by someone who would move heaven and earth to protect the little girl, who had just called him nice mister and believed in fairy tales. Victoria had made one crucial mistake. In all her careful planning, she had assumed that love, once destroyed, could never grow back. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Chapter 5. The Awakening Father. 2 weeks after the discovery, Ethan sat in his car across from Zoe's elementary school, watching through tinted windows as children poured out of the building like colorful confetti. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white, and for the first time in 7 years, he had skipped his morning vitamins, the cocktail of psychiatric drugs that Victoria administered every day to keep him compliant. The withdrawal was brutal. His head pounded, his hands shook, and waves of nausea rolled through him every few minutes. But underneath the physical discomfort, something remarkable was happening. He was thinking clearly for the first time since he was 15 years old. His thoughts were his own, and what he was thinking was making him sick for entirely different reasons. There she was, Zoe, walking slowly down the school steps with a backpack that looked too heavy for her small frame. Even from a distance, Ethan could see that she was alone. While other children ran to waiting parents or climbed onto buses with friends, his daughter stood by herself, scanning the crowd hopefully before her shoulders, sagged in disappointment. Ethan's heart clenched as he watched Zoe begin the long walk home, her tiny figure dwarfed by the urban landscape around her. She stopped at every crosswalk, looked both ways carefully, and kept her head down as she navigated through neighborhoods that no 7-year-old should have to travel alone. He followed at a distance, staying far enough back to avoid being seen but close enough to intervene if she encountered danger. What he saw during that 20-minute journey broke his heart piece by piece. Zoe stopped at a corner grocery store and carefully counted coins from a small purse, buying a single apple and a packet of crackers. She offered half the apple to a stray dog that followed her for 2 blocks. She helped an elderly man pick up groceries he dropped, even though it made her late. She waved at every person she passed, even though most ignored her completely. This was his daughter kind, careful, compassionate, despite the hardship she faced, and he had thrown her away like garbage because of his mother's lies. That evening, Ethan stood outside the run-down apartment building where Zoe lived with Maya and the woman she called Grandma Denise. The place was a testament to urban decay. Broken windows patched with cardboard, graffiti covering every available surface, and the lingering smell of desperation that clung to places where hope went to die. Through a basement window, he could see into what must be their apartment. The space was tiny, barely larger than his walk-in closet, but it was clean and filled with small touches that spoke of love. Despite poverty, children's drawings decorated the walls. A few battered books sat on a makeshift shelf made from milk crates, and a small table held what looked like homework materials, and there was Maya. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he saw his ex-wife for the first time in 7 years. She was thinner than he remembered, her face showing the wear of constant stress and exhaustion. Her beautiful dark skin had a gray undertone that spoke of malnutrition and overwork, and her hands, once soft and delicate, were now rough and scarred from years of manual labor. But she was still beautiful, even worn down by hardship, even exhausted from fighting battles that should never have been hers to fight. Maya still took his breath away. She was helping Zoe with homework at the tiny table, their heads bent together over what looked like a math worksheet. Ethan could see Maya's lips moving as she explained something, and Zoe's face lit up with understanding. The love between them was palpable, even from his hiding place outside their window. "Mama, I met a nice man today," Zoe was saying, her voice carrying through the thin glass. "He was real sad. but he was kind to me. Maya's head snapped up, sudden fear in her eyes. Zoe, what have I told you about talking to strangers? But he wasn't a bad stranger, Mama. He was worried about my hands when I was cleaning the steps, and he told me that any daddy would be lucky to have a little girl like me. Ethan watched as Maya's face went through a complex series of emotions: fear, pain, hope, and something that might have been longing. What did this man look like, baby? He had blue eyes like mine, and he was tall and handsome, but mostly he just looked really, really sad. Zoe paused in her coloring. Mama, do you think my daddy is sad too? Do you think he misses us? The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. Through the window, he could see tears streaming down Maya's face as she pulled Zoe into her arms. I think, Maya said carefully, her voice thick with emotion, that if your daddy knew what an amazing little girl you are, he would love you more than all the stars in the sky. Then why doesn't he come see us? Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan could see her struggling with how to answer. Finally, she said, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, baby. Sometimes they get confused by bad people who tell them lies. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there. Do you still love my daddy, Mama? Another long pause. I love the man I thought he was, Maya whispered. And I hope that man is still in there somewhere, fighting to come back to us. Ethan pressed his hand to the window, tears streaming down his face. She was still defending him. After everything he'd done, after throwing her and their newborn daughter into a blizzard, after 7 years of absence and silence, Maya was still telling their daughter that love could overcome anything. He didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve her forgiveness, or Zoe's hope, or the chance to be part of their lives. But he was going to fight for it anyway, because they deserved better than the life they'd been forced to live because of his failures. The next morning, Ethan made the first of many anonymous deliveries. A bag of groceries appeared on Maya's doorstep with no note, no signature, just nutritious food, and a few small luxuries that no one in their building could afford. He watched from his car as Maya found the bag, looked around in confusion, then brought it inside with tears in her eyes. The following week, Zoe's school fees were mysteriously paid in full, along with money for new school supplies and a warm winter coat. Ethan hired a private investigator to look into Denise's activities and discovered that the woman was running a small-time drug operation out of the basement apartment, using Zoe as an unwitting courier when she sent the child on errands around the neighborhood. The rage that discovery unleashed in Ethan was unlike anything he'd ever felt. The thought of his innocent daughter being exposed to drugs, of being used as a pawn in Denise's criminal enterprise, made him want to tear the world apart with his bare hands, but he couldn't act rashly. Not yet. First, he needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to his family. He needed evidence, allies, and a plan that would ensure Maya and Zoe's safety. When he finally made his move, he hired 3 different private investigators to dig into his own past to find proof of Victoria's manipulations and lies. What they uncovered made his blood run cold. The DNA tests that had proven Zoe wasn't his daughter. Fabricated, paid for with $50,000 from one of Victoria's secret accounts. The psychiatric medications he'd been taking since he was 15. A dangerous cocktail of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers that had essentially turned him into a zombie. Administered without his knowledge or consent, the breakdown he'd supposedly had at 16 that landed him in a psychiatric ward. Orchestrated by Victoria when he tried to escape her control and go to college on the other coast, Ethan discovered that he'd been a prisoner his entire adult life, controlled by a woman who claimed to love him, but had systematically destroyed every chance he'd ever had at real happiness. She had murdered his father, stolen his inheritance, poisoned his mind, and manipulated him into destroying his own family. The Ethan who had thrown Maya and Zoe into the snow hadn't really been him at all. It had been Victoria's puppet, dancing to her twisted tune. "Where have you been, darling?" Victoria's voice was sharp with suspicion as Ethan entered the mansion after another day of surveillance. "You missed your morning vitamins, and you were gone all day without telling me where you were going." Ethan looked at his mother, really looked at her for the first time in years. Without the chemical fog clouding his vision, he could see what she really was. A beautiful monster who had spent decades perfecting the art of psychological torture. "I had some business to take care of," he said carefully, not yet ready to tip his hand. "Business?" Victoria moved closer, her predator's instincts clearly aroused. "What kind of business requires you to skip your medication and disappear for hours at a time?" "The kind that's none of your concern," Ethan replied, his voice stronger than it had been in years. Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. "Everything you do is my concern, Ethan. I'm your mother. I've sacrificed everything to protect you, to make you strong, to keep you safe from people who would use you and hurt you. People like Maya. The name hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Victoria's face went very still, her mask of maternal concern slipping just enough to reveal the monster underneath. "We don't speak that name in this house," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "That woman nearly destroyed you. I saved you from her lies and manipulations, and I'll be damned if I let you forget the lessons we learned." "What if I told you that I remember things differently now?" Ethan asked. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What if I told you that I've been having dreams about a little girl with blue eyes who cries while she cleans floors with bleeding hands?" Victoria's face went pale. "You're having side effects from missing your medication. These false memories will fade once you get back on your proper dosage." "What if they're not false memories, Mother? What if they're the truth trying to break through years of chemical suppression?" "You're being ridiculous," Victoria snapped, but Ethan could see fear in her eyes for the first time in his life. "That child wasn't yours, Ethan. The DNA tests proved it. She was the product of that whore's infidelity. And you were right to throw them both out." "Show me the tests," Ethan demanded. "What?" "The DNA tests. Show them to me right now." Victoria's composure cracked completely. "I don't have to show you anything. I'm your mother. You trust me, remember? You've always trusted me. Maybe it's time I stopped," Ethan said quietly, and for the first time in his life, he walked away from his mother while she was still talking. Behind him, he could hear Victoria screaming his name, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He had a daughter to save, a wife to apologize to, and a life to reclaim from the woman who had stolen it all. Chapter 6. The legal battle begins. 1 month after the discovery, the law offices of Grayson, Whitestone, and Partners occupied the top 3 floors of the city's most prestigious downtown tower. At 7 in the morning, most of the building was empty, but Ethan sat in the senior partner's office, surrounded by evidence that would destroy his mother's carefully constructed web of lies. Charles Grayson, the city's most feared family law attorney, spread the documents across his mahogany desk like a general planning a war. The DNA lab records, financial statements, medical records, and witness testimonies painted a picture of systematic manipulation and abuse that made even the veteran lawyer's hands shake with rage. "This is the most comprehensive case of psychological and financial abuse I've seen in 30 years of practice," Grayson said, his voice grim. "Your mother essentially imprisoned you in your own mind, Mr. Langley. What she did to you, and by extension to your wife and daughter, constitutes multiple felonies." Ethan stared at the fabricated DNA results that had destroyed his family, his jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth ached. "How soon can we move?" "I've already filed the preliminary motions. Emergency custody hearing is scheduled for Friday." "But, Mr. Langley," Grayson leaned forward, his expression serious, "you need to understand what you're up against. Your mother has connections throughout the legal system, judges she's donated to, prosecutors she's had to dinner, police commissioners who owe her favors. This won't be a fair fight." "I don't care about fair," Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. "I care about justice. I care about protecting my daughter from the monster who's been controlling my life. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, I want my family back." Grayson nodded approvingly. "Then we go to war." The emergency custody hearing was held in family court downtown, a sterile building that had witnessed countless family tragedies, but rarely one as complex as the Langley case. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table, clean-shaven and clear-eyed for the first time in years, while his team of lawyers arranged their arsenal of evidence. Across the courtroom, Maya sat with her court-appointed attorney, her face a mask of confused shock. She wore her only good dress, a simple black outfit that she'd bought for job interviews, and kept glancing toward the door, as if looking for an escape route. When Ethan had first tried to approach her outside the courthouse, she'd actually run from him, terror written across her beautiful face. It had taken his lawyers and a court bailiff to convince her that she was safe, that this wasn't some elaborate trap designed to take Zoe away from her. "All rise," the bailiff called out, the Honorable Judge Eleanor Park presiding. Judge Park was a small, fierce woman in her 60s, with a reputation for seeing through legal manipulation. She took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "This is an emergency hearing regarding custody of the minor child, Zoe Cole," she began, consulting her files. "Mr. Langley, you're claiming paternal rights to a child you allegedly abandoned 7 years ago. This is highly unusual. Counselor Grayson, make your case." Grayson rose, his commanding presence filling the courtroom. "Your Honor, my client didn't abandon his daughter. He was the victim of an elaborate scheme orchestrated by his mother, Victoria, to destroy his marriage and separate him from his child. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Grayson began presenting evidence. The fake DNA results, the bank records showing the $50,000 payment to falsify them, the medical records documenting Ethan's involuntary psychiatric medication, and witness statements from former Langley estate employees who had seen Victoria's cruelty firsthand. Mr. Langley was systematically drugged with psychiatric medications from the age of 15, Grayson continued. These drugs, administered without his knowledge or consent, impaired his judgment, memory, and ability to make rational decisions. The night he allegedly abandoned his family, he was under the influence of a massive overdose of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers. Judge Park's eyebrows rose higher with each piece of evidence. Are you telling me that Mr. Langley was essentially drugged into throwing out his wife and newborn child? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Your Honor, and we have the medical evidence to prove it. Maya's attorney, a young public defender named Sofia Alvarez, stood up shakily. Your Honor, even if these allegations are true, my client and her daughter have been abandoned for 7 years. The child doesn't know her father. This sudden reappearance could be traumatic. If I may interrupt, Grayson said smoothly, we also have evidence that Mr. Langley has been trying to reconnect with his daughter. Anonymous grocery deliveries, paid school fees, medical expenses, all traced back to accounts controlled by my client. Maya's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she stared at Ethan. That was you? She whispered. Ethan met her gaze for the first time since the hearing began. I've been watching over you both, he said quietly. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but I never stopped. Mr. Langley, Judge Park interrupted. Save your statements for testimony. I want to hear from the child's mother. Maya stood on shaking legs, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Your Honor, two don't understand what's happening. 7 years ago, Ethan threw me and our newborn daughter out of his house in the middle of a blizzard. We nearly died, and now he's here claiming he was drugged, that his mother made him do it. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. 7 years of pain and anger fueling her words. Even if that's true, where has he been? Where was he when Zoe was learning to walk, when she had pneumonia, and I had to sell my body to pay for her medicine? Where was he when she cried herself to sleep, asking why her daddy didn't love her? The courtroom fell silent. Ethan's face had gone white, and even Grayson looked shaken by the raw pain in Maya's voice. Miss Cole, Judge Park said gently, I understand your anger, but if Mr. Langley was indeed a victim of systematic abuse and drugging, then what about us? Maya demanded, tears streaming down her face. What about Zoe, who spent 7 years thinking she wasn't good enough for her father to love? What about me, who's worked 3 jobs and lived in hell because the man who was supposed to protect us threw us away like garbage? Ethan stood up abruptly, ignoring his lawyer's restraining hand. You're right, he said, his voice breaking. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Maya. I know I can't take back what I did. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, please don't punish Zoe because of my failures. Mr. Langley, sit down, Judge Park ordered, but Ethan ignored her. I've been clean from the drugs for a month now, he continued, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. For the first time in 20 years, I can think clearly, and what I think is that I destroyed the most beautiful thing in my life because I was too weak to fight my mother's poison. But I'm fighting now, Maya. I'm fighting for Zoe, and I'm fighting for you, and I'm fighting to be the man I should have been 7 years ago. Mr. Langley, I will hold you in contempt if you don't. Let him speak, Maya said suddenly, her voice barely audible. Please, Your Honor, let him speak. Ethan took a shaky breath. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but Zoe is innocent in all this. She deserves to know her father, to have every advantage I can give her. She deserves to never scrub floors with bleeding hands again, to never worry about having enough food, to never doubt that she's loved completely and unconditionally. How do I know you won't change your mind again? Maya asked, her voice raw with vulnerability. How do I know that your mother won't find another way to control you, to turn you against us? Ethan's jaw tightened. Because I'm going to destroy her before she gets the chance. The courtroom erupted as the doors burst open, and Victoria swept in like an avenging angel in designer clothes. She was accompanied by 3 of the city's most expensive lawyers and a small army of private security. Your Honor, I object to these proceedings, she announced before anyone could speak. My son is clearly having another psychotic episode. He's off his medication and making wild accusations. Mrs. Langley, Judge Park said sternly, you have no standing in this courtroom. This is a custody hearing between I have every standing, Victoria snapped, her mask of refinement slipping completely. Ethan is my son, and he's mentally ill. He's been on psychiatric medication for years because he's dangerous when he's not properly medicated. Grayson was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of manipulation we've been documenting. Mrs. Langley has been illegally medicating her adult son for 20 years to maintain control over him. Ethan, baby, Victoria said, ignoring the lawyers and focusing on her son. Look at what you're doing. Look at how you're embarrassing our family. These people don't love you. They just want your money. Come home with Mama. Let me take care of you like I always have. Ethan stood slowly, and for a moment, everyone in the courtroom held their breath. Then he spoke, his voice clear and strong. You're not my mother, he said quietly. Mothers don't drug their children. Mothers don't murder their husbands. Mothers don't destroy their son's chance at happiness because they're too selfish to let him go. Victoria's face went white with rage. How dare you? I dare because I finally remember who I was before you broke me, Ethan continued. I remember the man who wanted to love his wife and daughter, the man you destroyed with your lies and your poison and your sick, need to control everything around you. Without me, you're nothing, Victoria screamed, her composure completely shattered. I made you everything you are. I protected you from that whore and her bastard child. The courtroom fell silent. Even Victoria's lawyers looked horrified by their client's outburst. Judge Park's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Mrs. Langley, you will remove yourself from my courtroom immediately, or I will have you arrested for contempt. As security moved to escort Victoria out, she turned to Ethan one last time. If you choose them over me, she hissed, I'll make sure you lose everything, every penny, every business deal, every connection you have. I'll destroy you, Ethan. I'll destroy you, and that little bastard and her mother. Mrs. Langley, Judge Park said icily, you have just threatened a minor child in open court. Bailiff, arrest this woman immediately. As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, still screaming threats and profanities, Ethan turned to Maya. She was staring at him with a mixture of fear, hope, and something that might have been recognition. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. I don't know if I can survive being hurt by you again. Then don't trust me, Ethan said simply. Trust the courts, trust the lawyers, trust the evidence. But please, Maya, trust that Zoe deserves to know her father loves her. Judge Park banged her gavel. In light of the evidence presented and the defendant's behavior in this courtroom, I'm granting temporary supervised visitation rights to Mr. Langley, with full custody evaluation to follow. Miss Cole, I'm also ordering immediate protective services for you and your daughter and emergency financial support to ensure your safety and well-being. As the courtroom began to empty, Ethan approached Maya cautiously. I know this is overwhelming, he said quietly. I know you have every reason to hate me, but thank you for giving me this chance. Maya looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. Zoe asked me last week if I thought her daddy was sad, she said finally. I told her that if he knew what an amazing daughter he had, he would love her more than all the stars in the sky. I do, Ethan whispered. I love her more than my own life. And I love you, Maya. I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't remember why. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move away when Ethan reached out to touch her face gently. Then prove it, she said simply, not with words or money or lawyers. Prove it by being the man Zoe dreams about when she talks to your picture every night. Ethan's heart stopped. She has my picture? She's had it since she was 3, Maya said softly. She talks to it every night, telling you about her day and asking when you're coming home. She paused, her voice breaking. I guess now she'll finally get her answer. As they left the courthouse together, not as a reunited family, but as two broken people trying to heal the wounds that had kept them apart, Ethan made a silent promise to the daughter he had abandoned and the woman he had betrayed. He would prove himself worthy of their love or die trying. And somewhere in a jail cell across town, Victoria was already plotting her revenge. Chapter 7. Maya's Brilliant Revenge. 2 months after the custody hearing, the law offices of Cole and Associates occupied a modest but respectable building in the city's legal district. A far cry from the opulent towers where Ethan conducted his business, but what the office lacked in marble and gold, it more than made up for in purpose and passion. This was where justice came to those who couldn't afford the luxury firms, where the forgotten and abandoned found their voices, and at the center of it all sat Maya no longer, the broken 19-year-old who had been sold into marriage, but a formidable woman who had transformed 7 years of suffering into an arsenal of legal expertise and righteous fury. Ethan stood in her reception area, clutching a bouquet of white roses, Zoe's favorite flower sand, trying to work up the courage to face the woman he'd destroyed. 2 months of supervised visitations had shown him glimpses of who Maya had become. But this was the first time she'd agreed to meet with him privately since the custody hearing. "Miss Cole will see you now," the receptionist said, her voice professionally cold. Everyone in the office knew Ethan's story, and their loyalty to their boss was absolute and unforgiving. Maya's office was nothing like the sterile corporate spaces Ethan was used to. The walls were covered with photographs of successful cases, families reunited, children protected, justice served. Awards and certifications hung beside Zoe's artwork, and law books shared shelf space with fairy tale collections that mother and daughter read together. "You can put those down," Maya said without looking up from the case file she was reviewing. "Zoe is allergic to rosacea bins since she was 3. But you wouldn't know that, would you?" The words hit Ethan like physical blows. Even in his attempts to show love, he was failing his daughter because he didn't know the most basic things about her. He set the flowers on the side table and took the seat across from Maya's desk, waiting for her to acknowledge him. When she finally looked up, Ethan's breath caught. Gone was the frightened girl who had scrubbed floors with bleeding hands. The woman sitting across from him radiated power and confidence, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence and something far more dangerous. The cold fury of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. "You wanted to talk," she said simply. "Talk." "I want to apologize," Ethan began, his prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate. "I want to explain." "Explain what?" Maya interrupted, leaning back in her chair. "Explain how you threw your pregnant wife and newborn daughter into a blizzard. Explain how you believed your psychotic mother over the woman who loved you. Explain how you lived in luxury for 7 years while your child scraped her hands bloody trying to survive." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and leave scars. Ethan absorbed them all, knowing he deserved worse. "I was drugged," he said quietly. "For 20 years, I know exactly what Victoria was doing." Maya cut him off again. "I've had 7 years to research every aspect of your family's crimes. 7 years to plan, to prepare. To position myself for this moment." Ethan's confusion must have shown on his face, because Maya's smile was sharp as a blade. "Did you really think I spent 7 years just surviving, Ethan? Did you think I was content to clean houses and wait tables while my daughter grew up believing her father didn't love her?" She stood and moved to the window, her silhouette commanding against the city skyline. "I told you once that love finds a way. What I didn't tell you is that sometimes love finds a way through revenge." "I don't understand." Maya turned back to him, and for the first time since he'd entered her office, she looked genuinely amused. "Of course you don't. You still see me as the helpless girl you married, the victim you abandoned. But, Ethan, I stopped being a victim the night you threw us out. That night, holding my dying baby in a freezing car, I made myself a promise. I would become strong enough to protect Zoe from anyone who tried to hurt her, including you." She returned to her desk and opened a thick file folder, spreading documents across the surface like a general displaying battle plans. "Do you recognize these?" she asked, pointing to a stack of contracts and business proposals. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes widening as he saw his own signature on documents he barely remembered signing. "These are from our marriage business deals I was working on when you were too drugged to read the fine print," Maya finished. "When you signed whatever your loving wife put in front of you because you trusted her to handle the details while you struggled with your mother's poison." The pieces began falling into place, and Ethan felt the color drain from his face. "Maya, what did you do?" "I did what any smart woman would do when married to a man whose mother was slowly destroying him," she said calmly. "I protected our interests. Every major contract you signed during our marriage, every business partnership, every real estate deal. I made sure there were clauses protecting the interests of your wife and any children born during the marriage." Ethan stared at the documents, his mind racing. "But these deals, they're worth millions. They're the foundation of my entire business empire." "Exactly." Maya's smile was cold as an Arctic winter. 40% of Langley Industries legally belongs to me, Ethan, and by extension to Zoe. The shopping centers, the real estate developments, the tech investments. I own nearly half of everything you think is exclusively yours." The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan felt like he was drowning, gasping for air as the implications of what Maya was telling him sank in. "You could have claimed it years ago," he whispered. "You could have taken everything." "I could have," Maya agreed. "But I needed you weak, distracted, and completely under your mother's control. I needed Victoria to feel safe and superior while I built my own empire in the shadows. She moved to another filing cabinet and pulled out more documents. Business licenses, corporate filings, tax records. Cole & Associates isn't just a law firm, Ethan. It's the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 7 years, I've built a network of businesses, investments, and partnerships that spans 3 states. I've helped other women like me, women whose husbands abandoned them, whose families threw them away, whose children needed protection from systems designed to fail them. Ethan's head was spinning. How? How did you do all this while working 3 jobs and taking care of Zoe? The same way your mother built her web of control. Maya said simply, patience, planning, and an absolute refusal to give up. The difference is, I built my empire to protect people, not destroy them. She sat back down, her eyes never leaving his face. Every grocery delivery you sent, every school fee you paid, every medical bill you covered, I tracked it all back to you. I've been watching you. Watch us, Ethan. I've seen you sitting in your car outside Zoe's school, following her home, learning her routines. You knew. I've known everything from the beginning. The private investigators you hired to research your own past, 2 of them work for me. The evidence that convicted your mother? Half of it came from files I've been building for 7 years. Ethan felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Why? Why help me at all if you hate me so much? Maya was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been since he arrived. Because Zoe deserves to know her father, she said simply, because despite everything you did to us, despite the years of pain and struggle and wondering if we would survive another day, I still believed that somewhere inside the man who threw us away was the man I fell in love with, Maya. But loving someone and trusting someone are 2 very different things. She continued, her voice hardening again. I may have helped orchestrate your mother's downfall, but that doesn't mean I've forgiven you. It doesn't mean I trust you with Zoe's heart or mine. She stood and moved to a safe in the corner of her office, returning with a thick legal document. This is a contract, she said, placing it in front of him. It outlines the terms under which you will be allowed to build a relationship with Zoe. Supervised visits, therapy sessions, background checks, financial transparency, everything designed to protect our daughter from being hurt again. Ethan picked up the contract, his hands shaking as he read the terms. They were strict, unforgiving, and completely reasonable given what he had done. And if I refuse, he asked, then you walk away from Zoe's life forever, and I use my 40% ownership of your company to destroy everything Victoria helped you build. I'll donate every penny to organizations that help abandoned children and abused women. Your mother's legacy will be wiped from the earth, and Zoe will grow up knowing that her father chose his pride over her love. Ethan set the contract down and looked at the woman who had outmaneuvered him completely. You really have thought of everything. I've had 7 years to think, Ethan. 7 years of watching our daughter cry herself to sleep. 7 years of working myself to exhaustion. 7 years of being strong when all I wanted to do was break down and die from the pain of losing you. For the first time since he'd entered her office, Maya's composure cracked slightly, and Ethan saw a glimpse of the heartbroken girl she had been. I loved you, she whispered. God help me. I loved you so much that I would have died for you. And you threw that love away because your mother told you to. I know, Ethan said, his own voice breaking. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Maya. You don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve Zoe's love. And I sure as hell don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking for one anyway because the alternative is living the rest of my life, knowing I failed the 2 most important people in the world. Maya wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. The powerful attorney once again replacing the vulnerable woman. Then sign the contract, she said. Prove that you've changed. Prove that you can put Zoe's needs before your own pride, before your mother's poison, before everything else in your life. Ethan picked up the pen without hesitation. What happens after I sign this? Then we see if the man I loved is still in there somewhere, Maya said quietly. We see if Ethan can be the father Zoe deserves instead of the monster Victoria created. As Ethan signed his name to the contract that would govern his relationship with his daughter, he realized that Maya's revenge was more devastating than anything Victoria could have devised. She hadn't just taken his money or his business, she had forced him to confront exactly what kind of man he had become and what kind of man he needed to be. One more thing, Maya said as he handed her the signed contract. Zoe doesn't know about any of this about my business empire, about the ownership stakes, about the years of planning. As far as she knows, I'm just her mama who works hard to take care of her. Why? Because she needs to love you for who you are, not fear you for what you own. And if you ever try to use your wealth or power to manipulate her, if you ever make her feel like she owes you anything for the privilege of having a father," Maya's eyes blazed with protective fury, "then you'll discover that revenge is a dish best served by someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose." Ethan nodded, understanding completely. He was no longer dealing with the naive girl he had married. He was dealing with a woman who had weaponized her pain and turned it into power, a woman who would burn down the world to keep her daughter safe. And despite everything, he had never loved her more. Chapter 8. The Price of Redemption. 6 months after the contract, the playground at Hillside Elementary was Zoe's favorite place in the world, where she could swing high enough to touch the clouds and pretend for just a few moments that she was flying away from all the complicated adult emotions that seemed to follow her everywhere lately. Ethan sat on a bench 30 feet away, close enough to keep her safe but far enough to respect the boundaries that Maya's contract had established. This was their third supervised visit this week, and while the court-appointed supervisor had finally relaxed enough to read her book instead of watching his every move, Ethan still felt like he was walking on eggshells around his own daughter. "Daddy, watch this," Zoe called out, pumping her legs to make the swing go higher. The word daddy still hit Ethan like lightning every time she said it. 3 months of supervised visits, family therapy sessions, and careful relationship building had led to this miracle. His daughter calling him by the name he dreamed of hearing for 7 years. "That's amazing, sweetheart," he called back, his heart swelling with pride and terror in equal measure. "Be careful." Zoe jumped from the swing at the peak of its arc, landing with the fearless grace that only children possess. She ran to Ethan, her face glowing with excitement, and something that looked like love. "Did you see how far I jumped?" "I bet I went like 10 feet. At least 10 feet. Ethan agreed, pulling out his phone. "Want me to take a picture to show Mama?" Zoe's face clouded slightly at the mention of Maya, and Ethan felt the familiar stab of guilt that accompanied any reminder of the tension between her parents. "Mama's been sad lately," Zoe said, settling onto the bench beside him. "She tries to hide it, but I can tell. She gets that crinkle between her eyebrows when she's thinking too hard about grown-up stuff." Ethan's chest tightened. Despite the professional success of their legal arrangement, despite the supervised visits going well, despite Zoe slowly learning to trust him, Maya remained as distant as ever. She was polite during custody exchanges, professional during family therapy sessions, and completely unreachable when it came to anything resembling forgiveness. "Your mama has a lot to think about," Ethan said carefully. "This is all new for everyone." "Are you and Mama going to get married again?" Zoe asked with the directness that only children could manage. The question caught Ethan off guard. "Zoe, that's complicated. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to tell the truth," Zoe observed. "I'm 8 now, Daddy. I understand more than you think I do." Ethan looked at his daughter, really looked at her and realized she was right. The past 6 months had changed her from a timid 7-year-old into a confident young girl who asked hard questions and deserved honest answers. "Your mama and I hurt each other very badly," he said slowly. "Sometimes, when people hurt each other, even if they're sorry, it takes a very long time to heal. Like when I broke my arm, and it took forever to stop hurting? Exactly like that, except hearts take even longer to heal than bones." Zoe considered this seriously. "But you still love each other, right? I can tell by the way you look at her when she's not watching." Ethan's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "You get the same sad, happy face that Mama gets when she looks at your picture," Zoe said matter-of-factly. "The one she keeps hidden in her jewelry box but thinks I don't know about." The revelation that Maya still kept his photograph hit Ethan like a physical blow. "She kept my picture? She talks to it sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep," Zoe continued, apparently unaware that she was destroying and rebuilding her father's world with every word. "She tells it about her day and about me, and about how much she misses the man she married before the mean lady made him go crazy." Ethan had to close his eyes against the wave of emotion that crashed over him. Even after everything, even after the years of abandonment and pain and struggle, Maya still talked to his picture, still missed him, still believed somewhere deep inside that the man she had loved was worth missing. "Zoe," he said quietly, "do you think Mama would be happier if I wasn't in your life?" Zoe's eyes widened with alarm. "Are you going to leave again?" "No," Ethan said quickly, pulling her into his arms. "No, sweetheart, I'm never leaving you again. I want what's best for you and Mama, even if that means—" "It means staying," Zoe interrupted fiercely. "It means fighting for us like Mama fought for me all those years. It means proving that love is stronger than hurt. Later that evening, Ethan stood outside the modest apartment that Maya and Zoe now called home, a far cry from the basement hovel where he'd found them, but still a world away from the mansion where they should have been living all along. Through the window, he could see mother and daughter at their kitchen table, Zoe doing homework while Maya prepared dinner. It was such a normal domestic scene, and it broke his heart that he was watching it from the outside looking in. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Victoria's sentencing hearing moved to Friday. 25 years minimum. She'll be in prison. Ethan stared at the message, waiting to feel satisfaction or relief, or some sense of justice served. Instead, he felt only emptiness. Victoria's punishment couldn't undo the damage she had caused, couldn't give him back the years he'd lost with his family, couldn't erase the pain that still lived in Maya's eyes every time she looked at him. A knock on his car window startled him from his thoughts. Maya stood outside his Mercedes, wearing scrubs from her shift at the legal aid clinic, and looking exhausted but determined. Ethan rolled down the window, his heart racing. "Is everything okay?" "Is Zoe's fine," Maya said. "She's doing homework. I saw you sitting out here and thought, we need to talk." "Okay," Ethan said, stepping out of the car. "Should we go somewhere private?" "Walk with me," Maya said simply, heading toward the small park at the end of the block. They walked in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. When they reached a bench overlooking a small pond, Maya finally spoke. "I heard about Victoria's sentencing," she said. 25 years. Justice served, I suppose," Ethan replied, though his voice held no satisfaction. "Is it?" Maya asked. "Does her punishment make you feel better about what happened to us?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "Nothing can make up for what I did to you and Zoe. Nothing can give us back those 7 years." Maya was quiet for a long moment, watching ducks glide across the pond's surface. "Zoe asked me today if we were going to be a family again." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that families come in all different shapes, and that the most important thing is love and respect and commitment to each other's happiness." "That's a good answer," Ethan said, "but it wasn't the answer she wanted." Maya continued. "She wants what every child wants. Parents who love each other as much as they love her." Ethan's heart clenched. "Maya, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I've been going to therapy," she interrupted. "Individual therapy, not just the family sessions for Zoe's sake. Dr. Bennett has been helping me work through everything." She turned to look at him directly for the first time in months. "And she's helped me understand that I've been holding on to my anger because it felt safer than risking my heart again, that I've been punishing you not just for what you did, but for making me love someone who could hurt me so deeply." Ethan felt tears burning his eyes. "Maya, I'm not ready to forgive you," she said quickly. "I may never be ready, but I'm ready to try to heal for Zoe's sake. And maybe for mine, too." "What does that mean?" Maya stood up, pacing to the edge of the pond. "It means I'm willing to try family dinners, real ones, not just custody exchanges. It means I'm willing to go to Zoe's school events together, to make decisions about her future as partners instead of adversaries." "And us?" Ethan asked quietly. "What about us?" "There is no us, Ethan," Maya said, but her voice was gentle rather than harsh. "Not yet, maybe not ever. But there's Zoe, and she deserves to see her parents working together, supporting each other, maybe even liking each other again." Ethan stood and moved closer to her, careful not to invade her space. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give," he said. "Friendship, partnership, co-parenting, anything that means I get to be part of your lives." "There are conditions," Maya said, and Ethan could hear the lawyer in her voice again. "Of course, no more supervised visits, but no overnight stays until Zoe is ready. No gifts that I haven't approved first. She needs to love you for who you are, not what you can buy her. And no lies, Ethan, ever, about anything, even if you think the truth will hurt me, even if it makes you look bad. No more secrets between us." "Agreed," Ethan said without hesitation. "And therapy," Maya continued. "Individual therapy for you, family therapy for all of us, and couples counseling if—" She paused, her cheeks flushing slightly. "If we ever get to a point where that becomes relevant, whatever you need," Ethan said, "whatever it takes." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the water. For the first time in months, the space between them didn't feel like a chasm filled with pain and regret. It felt like possibility. "Zoe says you look at me the way I look at your picture," Maya said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's heart stopped. "She told you about the picture?" "She tells me everything," Maya said with a small smile. That child has never met a secret she could keep. Do you look at my picture?" Ethan asked. Maya was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, barely audible, she said, "Every night, I tell it about my day, about Zoe, about how proud I am of the man you're trying to become." "Maya," Ethan breathed, taking a step closer. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand to stop him. "Don't make this more than it is. I'm not ready for more." But she looked at him with eyes that held the first spark of hope he'd seen since the custody hearing. "But maybe someday I could be." As they walked back toward the apartment complex, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 years. Hope, not the desperate, grasping hope of a drowning man, but the quiet, a steady hope of someone who had learned to value what he had rather than mourn what he'd lost. He had his daughter's love, his ex-wife's tentative trust, and the chance to prove that redemption was possible for even the most broken of men. It wasn't the fairy tale ending that Zoe dreamed about, but it was a beginning. And for now, a beginning was enough. Chapter 9. Healing the Broken Bonds. 11 years after the reunion, the auditorium at Hillside High School buzzed with the excited energy of graduation day. But Ethan only had eyes for one person in the sea of caps and gowns. Zoe Cole, now 18 and valedictorian of her graduating class, stood at the podium with the poise and confidence of someone who had learned early that strength came from surviving the impossible. But most of all, Zoe was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "I want to thank my parents for teaching me that love isn't perfect, but it's persistent, that families aren't defined by who never leaves, but by who chooses to stay and fight for each other, even when it's hard." Ethan felt tears burning his eyes as he watched his daughter, brilliant, beautiful, and impossibly wise, deliver her valedictory speech. Beside him, separated by careful distance but united in pride, Maya wiped her own eyes with a tissue she'd been clutching since Zoe's name was first called. 11 years. 11 years since that first supervised visit in the playground. 11 years of family dinners that slowly became less awkward. 11 years of school plays and soccer games and teenage drama that had somehow, against all odds, knitted them back into something resembling a family. Not the family Zoe had dreamed of as a 7-year-old, perhaps not the fairy tale reunion where Mama and Daddy fell back in love and lived happily ever after, but something real and hard-won and precious nonetheless. Flashback. 5 years ago, "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," 13-year-old Zoe had said, her voice serious in that way that always made Ethan's heart skip with parental anxiety. They were in his new apartment, modest by his former standards but warm and comfortable, filled with photos of Zoe and artwork she'd made over the years. Ethan had sold the mansion within months of Victoria's conviction, unable to bear living in the place where so much damage had been done. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Ethan asked, setting aside the book he'd been reading. Zoe took a deep breath. "I know about the business stuff, about Mom owning part of your company, about how she could have taken everything but didn't." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Zoe, I'm not stupid, Dad," Zoe continued, her voice matter of fact. "I've known for years that Mom's not just a lawyer helping poor people. I've seen the financial statements she leaves on her desk sometimes. I know she's rich. Too maybe richer than you. How do you feel about that?" Ethan asked carefully. Zoe was quiet for a moment, considering her words with the thoughtfulness that still amazed him. "I think it's awesome," she said finally. "I think Mom is the strongest person in the world, and I think she deserves everything good that's ever happened to her. And what about me? How do you feel about what I did to you and your mother?" "I think you were sick," Zoe said simply. "I think Grandma Victoria was evil, and she made you sick. And I think you've spent the last 5 years trying to get better." She paused, her young face scrunching with the effort of expressing complex emotions. "And I think you and Mom still love each other, but you're both too scared to admit it." Present day, graduation, which is why I've decided to attend Stanford University in the fall, where I'll be studying pre-med with a focus on pediatric psychology. Because if my family has taught me anything, it's that healing is possible even when it seems impossible. Thank you. The auditorium erupted in applause as Zoe stepped down from the podium, her radiant smile finding Ethan and Maya in the crowd. She had grown into a stunning young woman, tall like her father, graceful like her mother, with an inner light that had never been dimmed despite the shadows of her early childhood. "She's incredible," Maya whispered, leaning slightly toward Ethan in her excitement. "I can't believe she got into Stanford with a full scholarship." "She's her mother's daughter," Ethan replied, meaning it completely. "Brilliant, determined, and capable of anything she sets her mind to." For a moment, Their shared pride bridged the careful distance they'd maintained for 11 years. Their hands almost touched on the armrest between their seats before Maya caught herself and pulled away, the moment of connection dissolving back into polite co-parenting. But Ethan had felt it, that spark, that recognition, that echo of what they'd once been to each other, and from Maya's slight flush, he knew she'd felt it, too. Flashback. 3 years ago, I got asked to prom. 15-year-old Zoe announced over dinner at their weekly family meal, a tradition that had evolved from awkward obligation to genuine pleasure over the years. By who? Ethan and Maya asked simultaneously, then looked at each other with the shared amusement of parents whose protective instincts had kicked in. Lucas Park, from my AP chemistry class, Zoe said, her eyes dancing with mischief as she watched her parents' synchronized reaction. He's really sweet, and he's already been accepted to MIT. MIT, huh? Ethan said, trying to sound casual. That's impressive. And chemistry class, Maya added. So he's smart. Are you two seriously tag-teaming me right now? Zoe laughed. This is ridiculous. You're like a married couple when it comes to embarrassing me. The observation hung in the air, and Ethan saw Maya's face flush slightly. They had fallen into such natural patterns over the years, sharing parenting duties, making decisions together, presenting a united front on everything, from curfews to college choices. To an outside observer, they probably did look like a married couple. They just weren't married to each other. We just want you to be safe and happy, Maya said finally. And if this Lucas kid hurts you, he'll have to answer to both of us, Ethan added, making Zoe roll her eyes dramatically. God, you two are worse than actual married parents, she muttered, but she was smiling as she said it. Present day, after graduation. The graduation party was held at Maya's housino, longer the modest apartment, but a beautiful colonial in the suburbs that she'd bought with the profits from her expanding business empire. The backyard was filled with Zoe's friends, teachers, and family, all celebrating the remarkable young woman she'd become. Ethan stood by the buffet table, watching Zoe hold court among her classmates, when Maya appeared beside him with 2 glasses of champagne. She's going to change the world, Maya said, handing him a glass. Just like her mother, Ethan replied. Accepting the drink gratefully, they stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter laugh with her friends. Over the years, these moments of peace between them had become more frequent, the sharp edges of old pain slowly worn smooth by time and shared experiences. Ethan, Maya said suddenly, her voice careful, I want you to know, I'm proud of the father you've become. Zoe is lucky to have you in her life. The words hit Ethan like a physical force. In 11 years of co-parenting, Maya had never said anything so openly positive about him as a person rather than just as Zoe's father. That means everything to me, he said quietly. Coming from you, it means everything. I know I haven't been easy to work with, Maya continued, her eyes still fixed on Zoe. I know I've kept walls up, kept you at arm's length, even when you were trying to build bridges. You had every right to protect yourself, Ethan said. I destroyed your trust. I went on a date last week, Maya said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a rush. Ethan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Oh, Dr. When? From the hospital. He's been asking for months. And I finally said, yes. Maya glanced at Ethan, trying to read his expression. It was nice. He's a good mankind. Stable. Never been married. Wants children. That's good, Ethan managed, though the words felt like ground glass in his throat. You deserve to be happy, Maya. You deserve someone who I kept comparing him to you, Maya interrupted, her voice barely audible above the sounds of celebration around them. The entire evening, I kept thinking about how different he was from you, how safe he felt, how uncomplicated everything would be with someone like him. Ethan's heart was hammering so hard, he was sure she could hear it. And I realized that I don't want safe and uncomplicated, Maya said, finally turning to meet his eyes. I realized that some part of me has been waiting all these years for you to become the man I could love again. Maya, I'm not ready, she said quickly. I may never be ready. But I wanted you to know that it's not because you haven't changed or because you haven't proven yourself as a father. It's because I'm terrified of hoping for something I might lose again. Before Ethan could respond, Zoe appeared beside them, her face glowing with excitement and champagne. What are you two talking about so seriously? She asked, slipping her arms around both her parents' waists. This is supposed to be a party. Just telling your dad how proud we are of you, Maya said, her voice steady, despite the emotional conversation they'd just had. Both of you? Together? Zoe asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Like a team? Like partners? Like parents who love you very much, Ethan interrupted, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Now, go enjoy your party, Dr. Cole. I'm not Dr. Cole yet, Zoe laughed, but she squeezed them both tighter. But I loved the sound of it. As she danced away to rejoin her friends, Ethan and Maya were left alone again. The weight of unspoken words heavy between them. She's going to keep pushing, Maya said quietly. She's been pushing for years, trying to get us back together. I know, Ethan replied, and I don't want her to think that's her responsibility. But she's not wrong, is she? Maya asked, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear her. About us. I mean about there still being something here worth fighting for. Ethan turned to face her fully. This woman who had survived everything he'd put her through and emerged stronger, more beautiful, more incredible than ever. There's never been anything else for me, Maya, he said simply. Not in 11 years, not in 20 years, not ever. You and Zoe are my whole world, but I won't push you. I won't pressure you, and I won't let Zoe think she needs to fix us. What if I want to try? Maya whispered. What if I'm finally ready to see if we can be more than just Zoe's parents? Then we try, Ethan said, his heart soaring with hope and terror in equal measure. We try, and we see what happens. And we promise each other that no matter what, Zoe comes first. Zoe comes first, Maya agreed. And for the first time in 11 years, she didn't pull away when Ethan reached out to touch her face. As they stood there in the fading light of their daughter's graduation party, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and joy, Ethan finally understood what redemption really meant. It wasn't just about earning forgiveness for past mistakes. It was about becoming worthy of the love that had been waiting for him all along. And maybe, just maybe, it was about getting a second chance at the fairy tale ending that Zoe had been dreaming of since she was 7 years old. Chapter 10. Love's Final Test. 1 year after graduation, Zoe is 19. The coffee shop near Stanford's campus was Zoe's favorite place to study. But today she wasn't surrounded by textbooks and medical journals. Instead, she sat across from her parents separately, as always having what she had privately dubbed the most important conversation of my life. Parts 1 and 2. Ethan arrived first, as punctual as ever, wearing the casual clothes that had replaced his corporate armor years ago. At 47, he was still handsome, but there was a gentleness in his face now that the old Ethan had never possessed. The pharmaceutical fog that had once clouded his eyes had been replaced by clarity, wisdom, and a deep sadness that never quite disappeared. You sounded serious on the phone, he said, sliding into the booth across from her. Everything okay with school? With Lucas? Zoe smiled at the mention of her boyfriend, now fiancé, though her parents didn't know that yet. Lucas Park had proven himself worthy of the impossible standards her protective parents had set, earning their grudging approval through 2 years of patient courtship and unwavering devotion to their daughter. Dad, Zoe said, her voice carrying the same serious tone that had preceded important conversations since she was 8 years old. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen, not as my father, but as a man who's been trying to heal for 12 years. Ethan's expression grew concerned. Zoe, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, she said quickly. Everything's right, actually. But I need you to promise me something before I tell you what it is. Anything. Zoe reached across the table and took his hands that had once thrown her and her mother into a blizzard, but which had spent the last 12 years trying to make amends for that unforgivable moment. Promise me that you'll stop punishing yourself for what happened when I was a baby, she said quietly. Promise me that you'll finally forgive the man you were so you can be the man you are now. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Zoe, you've been my hero for 12 years. Dad, not because you're perfect, but because you never stopped trying to be better. And I need you to see yourself the way I see you, the way Mom sees you, even though she's too scared to admit it. What are you saying? Zoe took a deep breath. I'm saying that Lucas proposed to me last week, and I said yes. And I'm saying that I want both my parents to walk me down the aisle together as a family, because that's what we've always been, even when we pretended we weren't. 2 hours later, the same booth held a different conversation. Maya sat where Ethan had been, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. At 38, she was more beautiful than ever, success and confidence having added layers of strength to her natural grace. Engaged, she repeated, her voice a mixture of joy and panic. Zoe, honey, you're only 19. You have medical school ahead of you, your whole life. Mom, Zoe interrupted gently. I love him, really. Truly. Completely love him. The way you loved Dad before everything went wrong. Maya's breath caught. In all their years of careful co-parenting, Zoe had rarely mentioned the romantic relationship between her parents, respecting the boundaries they'd established. That's different, Maya said quietly. Your father and Iwei had a complicated situation. You had Grandma Victoria poisoning your marriage from the inside, Zoe said bluntly. But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It doesn't mean it's not still real. Zoe, I've watched you for 19 years, Mom. I've seen how you look at Dad when you think no one's watching. I've seen how you've never seriously dated anyone, how you make excuses every time someone asks you out. I've heard you talking to his picture when you thought I was asleep. Maya's face flushed. You're too young to understand. I understand that you're terrified of being hurt again, Zoe said firmly. I understand that Dad destroyed your trust, and it took years to rebuild even a friendship. But I also understand that you still love him, and he still loves you, and the only thing keeping you apart is fear. Some things can't be fixed, sweetheart. Some hurts run too deep. Zoe leaned forward, her blue eyes so like her father's blazing with determination. Then prove it. Prove that some hurts are too deep to heal by walking me down the aisle with Dad, by standing together as my parents for one perfect day, by showing me that love can't conquer everything, so I don't spend my marriage with Lucas believing in fairy tales. The challenge hung in the air between them, and Maya recognized her own legal tactics being used against her by her brilliant daughter. That's manipulation, she said, but there was admiration in her voice. That's love, Zoe corrected. That's a daughter who wants to see her parents happy together or apart, but happy. And, Mom, you haven't been truly happy in 20 years. 6 months later, the wedding day, the garden venue was perfect, intimate, elegant, and filled with white flowers that seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun. Zoe had planned everything herself, with input from both parents but careful attention to creating something that belonged to her and Lucas, rather than to anyone's expectations or past disappointments. Ethan stood in the groom's quarters, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, when Lucas appeared beside him. Nervous? The young man asked, though he seemed calm despite it being his wedding day. Terrified, Ethan admitted, but not about you marrying my daughter. About what happens after. Lucas, brilliant, kind, and wise beyond his 21 years, had figured out the family dynamics long ago. Zoe told you about her request walking her down the aisle with Maya? Yeah. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he tried once again to get his tie right. I don't know if I can do it, Lucas. I don't know if I can stand that close to her, pretend we're a happy family, and then go back to being polite strangers afterward. What if you didn't have to go back? Lucas asked quietly. Ethan looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, what if Zoe's right about her mother? What if Maya's just as scared as you are but willing to take the risk for Zoe's sake? What if today is your chance to finally stop punishing yourselves for the past and start building a future? In the bridal suite, Zoe stood before a full-length mirror, radiant in a simple but elegant wedding dress that somehow managed to honor both her parents' styles. Maya stood behind her, making final adjustments to her daughter's veil, tears streaming down her face. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Maya whispered. I look like you, Zoe said, meeting her mother's eyes in the mirror. Everyone always says I look like Dad, but I see you in my face, too, especially when I'm determined to get my way. Speaking of getting your way, Maya said, her voice carefully controlled. Are you sure about this walking down the aisle thing? I don't want your wedding day to be about your parents' drama. Zoe turned around, taking her mother's hands in both of hers. Mom, do you love Dad? The question was so direct, so simple, that Maya couldn't hide behind her usual deflections. Yes, she whispered. God help me. Yes, I still love him. And do you think he loves you? Ice. I think he does. Then why are you both so determined to be miserable? Zoe asked, her voice gentle but firm. Why are you both choosing to be alone when you could choose to be together? Because I'm terrified, Maya admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. Because losing him the first time nearly killed me, and I don't think I could survive it again. What if you didn't have to lose him? Zoe asked. What if this time you both fought for each other instead of letting other people's poison win? The ceremony was supposed to begin at 4 o'clock, but at 3:58, Zoe was nowhere to be found. Ethan and Maya had been waiting in the garden's entrance, maintaining their careful distance, when Zoe's maid of honor rushed up to them in a panic. She's not in the bridal suite, Emma gasped. She's not anywhere. Lucas is freaking out. The guests are starting to murmur. Where could she be? Ethan and Maya looked at each other, and in that moment of shared parental panic, all their walls came down. The old oak tree, they said simultaneously. They found her there, sitting beneath the massive tree at the edge of the garden, still in her wedding dress but with her shoes off and her feet in the grass. She looked up when she heard them approaching, and her face was streaked with tears. Zoe. Maya rushed to her side. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Are you having second thoughts about Lucas? I'm not having second thoughts about Lucas, Zoe said quietly. I'm having second thoughts about everything else. Ethan knelt beside his daughter, his heart breaking at the sight of her tears. Talk to us, baby girl. What's going on? I realized something, Zoe said, looking back and forth between her parents. I realized that I've been so focused on getting you two back together that I forgot to ask if that's what you really want. I've been manipulating you, pushing you, trying to force a fairy tale ending because that's what I wanted, not because it's what you needed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smudging her carefully applied makeup, and I'm scared that if I walk down that aisle with both of you, and then you go back to being strangers afterward, I'll have turned my wedding day into another reminder of what we can't have instead of a celebration of what we do have. Maya and Ethan exchanged a look over their daughter's head, a look full of love, regret, hope, and 20 years of unfinished business. Zoe, Maya said quietly, what if I told you that your father and I have been talking? Really talking. Not just about parenting decisions or your college plans, but about us? Zoe's head snapped up. You have? For months, Ethan added. Ever since your graduation, we've been figuring things out slowly, carefully, but honestly. We've been going to counseling together, Maya continued. Not couples therapy exactly, but sessions focused on healing the past, so we can build a future, whatever kind of future that might be. Zoe's eyes widened. You've been seeing Dr. Bennett together for months, and you didn't tell me? We wanted to be sure, Ethan said. We wanted to know if what we were feeling was real or just nostalgia and wishful thinking. We didn't want to get your hopes up if we couldn't make it work. And? Zoe asked, her voice barely a whisper. Maya looked at Ethan, and he nodded encouragingly. And we've realized that some love is strong enough to survive anything. Even betrayal, even abandonment, even 20 years of being apart. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Zoe breathed. We're saying that after this wedding is over, after you and Lucas are off on your honeymoon, your father and I are going to start dating, Maya said, her face glowing with happiness and terror in equal measure. Really dating like teenagers who are terrified and excited and completely crazy about each other. Zoe let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around both her parents. You mean it? You're really going to try? We mean it, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. We're going to try to be what we should have been 20 years ago. What we would have been if we'd been stronger, braver, and less willing to let other people destroy what we had. But first, Maya said, pulling back to look at her daughter, we need to get you married to that wonderful young man who's probably convinced you've run away and left him at the altar. Zoe laughed, wiping her eyes and somehow managing to look radiant despite her smudged makeup. Do you think we can still pull off the walking down the aisle together thing, even though I've kept everyone waiting and probably look like a raccoon? Sweetheart, Ethan said, helping her to her feet, you could be covered in mud, and you'd still be the most beautiful bride who ever lived. And yes, Maya added, taking Zoe's other arm, we can absolutely walk you down the aisle together as a family. As the family we've always been, even when we were too scared to admit it. The wedding ceremony was everything Zoe had dreamed of and more. She walked down the aisle between her parents, all three of them crying happy tears, while Lucas waited at the altar with a smile that could have powered the entire venue. But the moment that would live in everyone's memory forever came during the reception when Zoe stood to give her speech. A year ago, she began, her voice clear and strong. I asked my parents to walk me down the aisle together not because I wanted to manipulate them into getting back together, but because I wanted them to remember what it felt like to be a team, to be partners, to be the family that love created. Even when that love got lost for a while, she paused, looking at Ethan and Maya, who were sitting together at the parents' table, holding hands for the first time in 20 years. Today, they didn't just walk me down the aisle. They reminded me, and everyone here, that some love stories don't end when the characters make mistakes. Some love stories are strong enough to survive anything, even 20 years of separation, because real love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other again and again. Even when it's hard, she raised her champagne glass, her eyes shining with joy. So here's to second chances. To love that never dies. And to fairy tale endings that are worth waiting for. And here's to my parents, who taught me that the best love stories are the ones where the characters have to fight for their happy ending. As the reception continued around them, Ethan and Maya slipped away to the garden, to the same oak tree where they'd found Zoe before the ceremony. Are we really doing this? Maya asked, her hand still in his. Are we really going to try again? Are you scared? Ethan asked, terrified. She admitted. Good, he said, pulling her closer. That means it matters. That means it's real. What if we mess it up again? Then we'll fix it again. Ethan said simply, however many times it takes, for however long it takes. Because Zoe was right, some love is worth fighting for. And, Maya, you are worth fighting for. You've always been worth fighting for. As the sun set over their daughter's wedding, Ethan kissed Maya for the first time in 20 years, and both of them finally understood what their daughter had known all along. That love doesn't end when it gets broken. It just learns how to heal stronger than before. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient and very willing to forgive, it comes back stronger than ever.